Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for March 6th, 2025. Well, as is often the case when society is going between two different epochs, there's a period of turbulence while the old era is trying to reassert itself and a new era is being born. And that's what's the cause of the turbulence today, the fast-breaking developments, the shifts from one day to next, the world seemingly turned upside down, because we're coming to the end of a 500-year-old paradigm, which was largely shaped by the period of European colonialism. Now, what we're seeing is, at the center of this shift, is the series of wars and destabilizations that are largely run on behalf of a unipolar order controlled by the City of London and Wall Street. And we're seeing now a fight against that coming from Donald Trump and the United States in alliance with Russia and Vladimir Putin. It's not a consolidated alliance, but it's moving very rapidly, especially as Trump is moving ahead with a peace plan for Ukraine. Now, it was advanced further yesterday by the announcement that even though Zelensky said he's now willing to work with Trump on his terms, Trump and the United States ordered the end of intelligence sharing with Ukraine on top of cutting off weapons supplies. So this is more pressure on Zelensky to go beyond the ceasefire to actually end the war. Now, this has caused great panic inside Ukraine with the military, but NATO is completely hysterical, insisting that the war be kept going. And they accepted the lies that were presented by Zelensky, that the war has to continue because you can't trust Putin, that he's supposedly violated every agreement he's made, which is simply not true. It's in fact the other way around. If you look, for example, just at the most important, that was the Minsk Accord, which Zelensky said the Russians broke. No, Zelensky bragged that he was not going to carry out the Minsk Accord. But even worse, Hollande and Merkel, the president of France and the chancellor of Germany, admitted that they only signed the Minsk Accord in order to give time for Ukraine to have a military buildup through NATO. So the idea that it's Russia that is involved in unprovoked attacks is completely wrong. And yet, Europe is acting as though the Russians are about to invade Western Europe. Let me give you what Macron said yesterday in an address to the French nation. These are not exact quotes, but they're sequential. He said, "We need to fight to ensure stability." So in other words, war rather than peace is the basis for stability. He said, "We need to be ready if the United States is not by our side." Well, the break between the U.S. and Europe is growing. Then he said, "We need to arm ourselves more. We need to deter. We must reinforce our own defense and security." Why? Because the threat is coming from the East, he said, and we are entering a new era. That last phrase is probably the only thing he said that was legitimate. He went on to say we need to increase military production. We must reindustrialize our nation in order to be able to defend ourselves. How about reindustrializing in order to feed your nation, to develop infrastructure, housing, medical care? Well, none of that's really there. And he said France has a special role to play because it's the most effective army in Europe. Now, that's one European leader. Starmer is even worse, but I won't even go into that because if you want to see what Starmer's up to, you can look at any of the London-based newspapers and see the hysteria growing day by day. Now, while there's clarity on what Trump is doing on Ukraine, and especially it will be furthered when they finally announce the summit with Putin and probably a meeting after that with Xi Jinping, there are other questions about Trump's policy. Let me just identify two of them. What about Gaza? It appears as though Trump is going to follow the Biden policy of support for Netanyahu and the ethnic cleansing of Palestine? If so, that's a horrible decision. And I suspect sooner or later the Israeli people are going to throw out Netanyahu. And what's going to happen with the U.S., which is tying itself to him? Now, yesterday there was the announcement of the plan from the March 4th summit in Cairo, the so-called Egyptian plan for redeveloping Gaza. It's a 5-year reconstruction plan, $53 billion, to create a smart city where 3 million Palestinians can live. It would create 500,000 jobs, especially in construction, and the Egyptians laid out a detailed plan, which includes creation of an industrial zone, fishing and commercial ports, housing, utilities, roads, and a Gaza airport. As for funding, they talk about funds from the United Nations, from international financial institutions, donor nations. That's one of the key ones, which includes the United Arab Emirates, hopefully Saudi Arabia and others, the development banks, and foreign direct investment and private sector. Now, this was a very significant presentation, and what's important is that it's a step forward for the Arab nations to ensure the survival of the Palestinian people. Immediately, Netanyahu rejected it. And there seemed to be some initial negative comments coming from the United States, where maybe this whole idea of Trump Disney World on the Mediterranean is still holding sway. But I would refer you to the discussion I had yesterday with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, which is linked at the bottom of the description section, where she talked about what could be done to make the Gaza solution succeed, and how it needs more than just what's been presented so far. It needs the LaRouche Oasis plan. Now, one other aspect overlooked from Trump's address the other night was his comment, "My administration is reclaiming the Panama Canal." Sorry, my writing is terrible. So he said he's about to reclaim the Panama Canal. And this has to do with the taking of 2 Panama Canal ports, supposedly from China. Well, he left out the fine print. So let me tell you what the fine print says. The takeover is not from China, but from a Hong Kong-based firm called C.K. Hutchison, which is one of the largest, if not the largest, port owning and operating companies in the world. It was bought from C.K. Hutchison for $22.8 billion. Who is the buyer? BlackRock. So Trump, for obvious reasons, didn't mention that BlackRock is the one taking it over. And the obvious reason is that BlackRock is a predatory vulture fund, which, in conjunction with State Street and Vanguard, is taking over most of the world. It's part of what was previously called the Great Reset, where you have corporate cartels of the military-industrial financial complex gobbling up every resource, every institution they can. This is much bigger than just Panama. By taking over 80% of C.K. Hutchison, BlackRock is now the controlling interest, has controlling interest in 43 ports in 23 countries, some of the largest in the world. Now, what BlackRock represents is this military-industrial financial complex with the City of London. This is the shape of a new global order. And it's a global order in which small networks of extremely wealthy, connected individuals use their integrated links of a handful of corporate cartels to determine all aspects of trade and finance. And here we see, with the takeover of these ports and canals, that BlackRock is going to have the controlling interest in what used to be under the power of the British Empire. That was what the Brits did to control the trade, and the other side was control finance. Well, we now have a report that BlackRock is the largest holder of Bitcoin, and there are discussions underway about how you can replace national credit sovereignty with control by the largest corporate cartel. That is, that they will, as a private company, underwrite reorganization of the debt in which they will grab national assets and in return put out funny money. Now, that's not exactly a free market measure. That's not exactly going to make America great again, but it will make America the greatest debtor in the world, and that debt will be held by venture or vulture capitalists such as Larry Fink of BlackRock, who will be able to dictate policy to nations. And if you know anything about how the Congress works, it means this is the grouping, this group of corporate cartels that will control what comes out of the Congress, as it has been, which is why we're in such a mess. So tomorrow, Friday, will be the International Policy Committee Zoom call. There'll be a discussion both of Ukraine and Gaza, and you should, it's at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and you should join that and become a part of the International Peace Coalition that was set up by Helga Zepp-LaRouche to make sure that the transition between these two paradigms can be one to a peaceful era of cooperation, as opposed to war and provocation of geopolitics. Also, since it's Friday, I'll take your questions. You can send them to me at harleysch@gmail.com. Hopefully, I'll hear from a lot of you.